Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome APTA Vice Chair David Stackrow.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the closing session of the APTA's 2018 Rail Conference. We're in the final stretch. I know it's been a very full 3 or 4 days for most of you, but I hope you'll help us make this session a great success for 2 reasons. First, we're going to hear about innovative strategies that can create a better future for rail. We have 3 outstanding speakers with us, and what they have to share is vitally important to our industry. Second, at the close of the session, we're going to celebrate next year's host city for the 2019 Rail Conference by giving away a $500 gift card. To claim the prize, though, you must be present when we select the winning ticket. With that, let's settle in for what promises to be some of the best 60 minutes of the Rail Conference. Moderating the discussion this morning is Kevin Quinn. Kevin is the administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. Administrator Quinn has more than a decade of public and private sector experience in transit and planning industries. Prior to being appointed administrator, he served as the Maryland DOT's Director of Planning and Programming. Most recently, Kevin managed the design and implementation for Baltimore Link, a $135 million comprehensive transit network redesign. This initiative includes the restructuring of more than 60 bus routes and the introduction of new high-frequency lines, dedicated lanes, and transfer facilities, a new fare policy, and a public outreach and education campaign. Prior to his work in Maryland, Kevin oversaw the development of $1.5 billion in winning grant applications for transit infrastructure damaged in Hurricane Sandy as part of the New York City Transit Resiliency and Recovery Grants Program. Please join me in welcoming MTA Administrator Kevin Quinn.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. We've got a fantastic session geared up for you. We're going to take a look at some innovative solutions to speeding up the integration of technology into passenger rail operations, all while looking at cutting costs, increasing capacity, and increasing reliability. These are goals that I know everybody in this room can really get behind. This morning's discussion, however, comes with a twist. We're going to learn about European models from 2 of the biggest thinkers and best planners in the global passenger rail industry. This general session will present some really fresh ideas. I think you're really going to love it. For many of our common challenges, such as growing traffic congestion, service challenges, rising costs, and shifting customer demands, just to name a few. We'll be hearing from 2 rail industry thought leaders from the European Union. And they'll each offer a presentation, and then we'll have some time for questions. So first up is Keir Fitch. Keir is head of the Unit for Rail Safety and Interoperability, the Directorate General for Mobility and Transport with the European Commission in Brussels. And Mr. Fitch oversees the Commission's policies and objectives on a number of transportation and mobility areas, including cutting transport-related greenhouse gas emissions, eliminating conventionally fueled cars in cities, providing most medium-distance travel by rail, and completing the European high-speed rail network. Very impressive. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Fitch to the stage.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here in Denver. I have to say I was last in Denver 10 years ago, and I'm incredibly impressed by what's happened to public transportation in this city in the 10 years between my visits. So clearly Denver is certainly leading the way as how we should be going in making our cities friendly for pedestrians, friendly for our citizens. What I want to talk to you about this morning, as you just heard, is how we're doing innovation in Europe, how we're trying to actually bring people to rail to deliver on some of those high-level objectives you've just heard. And I also want to talk a bit about ERTMS. ERTMS, as I think most of you know, is our European Rail Traffic Management System. Effectively, it's our European alternative to PTC. So I want to use that as a bit of an example for how we're delivering some of the innovation. But let's go to the big picture first. What are we doing with rail in Europe? How are we making it so that we can actually achieve that aspiration of getting a lot of medium distance transport onto rail, of using rail as a key part of our strategy for decarbonisation, but also as a key part of the strategy for making our cities livable, addressing all the problems of congestion. And of course, like the US, we have a growing trend towards urbanisation, population increases, and therefore great increases in congestion, which we reckon costs several % of the European GDP each year. Well, what are we doing? We have a strategy which is threefold. It's about investment, it's about regulation, driving the policy outcomes we want, and it's about innovation. And firstly, if you look at the whole investment story, Europe has two big funds that we manage centrally to help support member states in delivering infrastructure across the Union. These we aim particularly at addressing the missing links between member states at the big corridors where we want to see traffic growth. And for that, we have a fund. For the last 7 years, it's been about 26 billion euros. And about 70% of that has been focused on rail expenditure. So a very big commitment from our total funding for rail. The cohesion funds, the regional funds, this is money that we give to the poorer regions of Europe, primarily parts of Eastern Europe and some of Southern Europe, again to make up for the deficiencies in their infrastructure from years of underspending. That's more mixed in how it's spent, but again, a great deal of it is committed to transit and to rail. And so again, you can see from the slide, we spend about 20 billion euros across the Eastern European network through these cohesion funds over the past 7 years. Now that's delivering real results. We're seeing mixed picture across Europe, but a lot of growth in transit into the bigger cities, good growth on our high-speed network, but in those parts of Europe where the network is run down, is very old, then of course that growth is not there. There's a tendency for people still to see the car as the sort of the status symbol, the kind of thing in Western Europe that perhaps we saw 20 years ago, but now we're trying desperately to show them that rail and transit can move ahead and deliver the system of the future. That's the past 7 years. We're just in the process of agreeing the Union's budget for the next 7 years. And you'll see that at least the proposal at the moment, and this still does have to be signed off by the member states, but the proposal for the Connecting Europe facility is a further increase in the size of that fund. Slight refocusing. You'll see quite a lot of that fund now is really focused on delivering innovative solutions. So we'll hear later about the research initiative we're doing, but with the new CEF, we hope we will have a lot of money there to really ensure that we can take the innovations that we're developing and have a lot of money to push them out live on the network. Interestingly, you'll also see there that geopolitical developments are leading us to think we do need to spend some more money on developing our rail networks and our road networks to deal with strategic threats. So there's a pot of money there that will be also addressing some of those. And we're looking at the moment at how rail can play a role in meeting those challenges. Now, what about innovation? Well, one thing that we've realized was that there was a lot of research going on in rail, a lot of great ideas coming out, but perhaps not a great deal of delivery of those ideas in terms of solutions on the real network. So what we created with strong support from industry going back, well, we finally got it up and running from 2014 onwards, is what we call Shift to Rail. Now, Carlo Borghini, who's our executive director of that, will be speaking to you later. But essentially, Shift to Rail is a partnership between industry and the union. Industry in the broadest sense, we bring together all the big suppliers, many of whom, of course, you're very familiar with here in the States as well, Siemens, Alstom, Bombardier, and Saldo, All the big players are part of that, but importantly also some of the big railway operators, Deutsche Bahn, SNCF from France, UK's Network Rail, they all sit down with us, they all contribute money to this program, and together collectively we try and agree a vision of what actually is needed to deliver on our aspirations for Europe for the future. And as you see, we've got some pretty ambitious KPIs for Shift to Rail, cutting the cost of rail transport hugely by 50%, massive increases in our capacity, and very importantly also increases in reliability and punctuality. Because of course we might have these aspirations to hugely increase the use of rail in Europe, but we're not going to do that simply by using sticks and forcing people onto the railways. We want actually to make rail a preferred medium, a medium that people go to and use because it's reliable, because they can understand how to use it easily, and because it buys into their lifestyle. So that's what we're seeking to deliver with that. The structure of this, well, Carla will go into more details of it, but you see there are three basic strands to it. One is completing the single European railway area. Now, this is perhaps an issue you don't have in the US, but of course, in Europe, we have a very big rail network. We have a lot of trains going cross-border. But what we have is a system where historically each country developed their own rail network. They developed their own standards for that network. A lot of it was about national companies giving business to their local preferred supplier. And in the past, for strategic military reasons, they even tried sometimes to make sure the railways didn't work too well together. Now, that is something that we, of course, are trying to address because particularly for freight traffic, we desperately need freight to flow much more easily across Europe to be attractive as a competitor to road. And so we have a very big regulatory push to align the technical standards across the whole of the European rail network, which will then allow trains to flow readily across borders, and also, of course, very importantly, allow us to buy common equipment across the whole of the European rail network. So creating economies of scale, creating the incentive for reinvestment, the development of innovation, and driving down costs. So actually the cost to the taxpayer or to the passenger of rail is decreased while we're providing better, more modern products. So the single European railway area is very, very important to this. Of course, attractiveness and competitiveness in general, as I say. And for us, leadership in the global rail market, because Europe historically has had some of the leading manufacturers of rail equipment, has had a big outreach to the rest of the world. But of course, that market is increasingly challenged, particularly by the strength of China. And we want to be able to compete effectively in that market globally. So our objectives in developing innovation are to ensure that actually we have a product which is good and saleable to the rest of the world as well. Now, again, of course, Shift to Rail is funded under our current 7-year budget programme. It's got a substantial budget. It has 420 million euros provided by the European Union, and matching, in fact, slightly more than matching contributions by industry. So the total size of Shift to Rail 1 is about €1 billion. We think we could do a lot more with a lot more money. Now, the Commission certainly believes that investment in research and innovation is vital to the future of Europe. So you see, again, in the budget proposals for the next 7 years that have just been produced, the Commission is trying to increase the overall research and innovation funding available from member states by about 20%, so that the overall budget for research over the period would be about 100 billion euros. So a very big plan. We're still in internal discussions as to quite how much of that envelope goes to transport, but I think the early signs are that transport and energy investment is still seen as one of the key drivers for European productivity. So we're likely to see a substantial increase in the part of that budget allocated to transport, and certainly we hope rail as well. I mean, that, again, is the discussion that we'll be having with our member states over the next couple of years. So the pictures might change slightly, but we believe that this will carry on being a strong, strong priority. What are we going to do with rail research in that then? Well, clearly, we need to carry on with Shift to Rail because we've seen huge value in this partnership between member states, industry, the Commission and the suppliers. But we do think we need to make sure that what we do in the next period is more transformative. It's clear that although we see huge environmental value in rail, huge value in rail in terms of getting large numbers of people in and out of big cities, there's a lot of challenge coming from innovation in other parts of the transport industry, particularly, of course, connected and autonomous cars. We haven't heard much about it in this conference, but Hyperloop keeps coming and knocking at our doors. I think they keep coming and knocking at many of your doors saying, this is the way of the future. Well, we still think rail has a big part to play, but if rail is going to play that part, we have to be focused on delivering things that really will improve the quality and the flexibility of rail. So we will have a very strong push on further rail automation. Of course, automation is not actually new to rail. If you look at subway systems, full automation goes back almost 50 years. But on the main line, on the commuter routes, on the intercity routes, we don't have much automation yet, and we're looking to a big push to develop automation of operations. But also linked to the ATO aspect, we want to ensure that that's backed up by a full automated traffic management system so that we can actually have on-the-fly real-time management of trains in a way that simply isn't possible at the moment. For freight, that might mean we can repath trains almost in real time rather than waiting weeks, as is often the case in Europe, to get the schedules for freight trains, particularly if they're running internationally. It would also mean that there's much more resilience in the case of disruption. And perhaps most importantly, it might give us the opportunity to run very different kind of rail services. Instead of running long, heavy trains, perhaps relatively infrequently, we can move towards something much more akin to a pod concept, certainly on the more suburban or semi-rural lines, offering smaller but very frequent trains because we won't have the costs of drivers, etc. And we would have the next generation of the ERTMS signalling system allowing much, much closer pathing of trains so that capacity would no longer be a problem. So, and then finally, of course, in that digitalization idea, we need to ensure that the passenger experience is absolutely smooth so they can move freely from first mile, last mile onto the rail network, off it onto other modes of transport. And again, all the fare collection, any dealing with disruption happens automatically. And we're looking at also not only innovation, but a lot of work in terms of setting standards across the European rail industry so that actually that process, both within the network and intermodally, can happen very effectively. We need more input to our future shift to rail from the urban operators. We've had strong buy-in from the intercity, the interurban and commuter operators, but not so much from the subways and the streetcars, the tramways. So we're wanting to develop more of that. And we do need to get some of our poorer member states, some of the Eastern European member states, more engaged with it as well. Of course, I should also say, because this is an international gathering, that this is an area we really want to reach out and work with players across the rest of the world in as well. Although, of course, the EU funding has to go to EU participants, we're very, very welcoming to working with, collaborating with players across the rest of the world in joint projects and shared projects. And certainly we're hoping to discuss with a number of the key players in the US how we might work more closely with you in some of these areas. Now, I said I wanted to also give you an overview of ERTMS, of our signalling system, as an example of how we're using innovation, but also some of the problems that we're trying to address with it and some of the issues we still have with making it work really effectively. Well, why did we have ERTMS in the first place? Well, what we had before the development of ERTMS was each member state or each national railway developing its own new systems of train protection and of signalling. And of course that means that when you've got trains trying to cross borders, they ended up with, in some cases, up to about 7 or 8 different signalling systems, different train protection systems, all of which had to be integrated into the locomotive. And of course that creates huge costs, huge complexities, huge delays, and therefore makes international traffic much, much less attractive than it ought to have been. So the idea of ERTMS is that we replace all those diverse national systems by a single European system, fully controlled, all the specs fully controlled at the European level, and therefore allow over time seamless cross-border traffic. It's just showing it diagrammatically, but it really is a huge issue that we've had to face trying to get this cross-border interoperability to work. This again is a good example where we're using innovation and regulation and finance alongside each other. Because of course we've had the innovation in terms of the development of ERTMS and the continuing development of new ideas, new standards for ERTMS as we move forward. But we've also backed that up by a single legislative framework, single regulatory and standards framework, so that it is clear what the system looks like, so that everybody has to develop to the same target system. And in future, that will also be backed up by a single approvals process run at the European level by our European Railway Agency. So if you have a train with the ERTMS on it, you will come to a single place in Europe to get approval for that. And that, again, will help us ensure that the theory of the common standard is also reflected in practice. Just a bit of a comparison between ERTMS and PTC. Of course, the European network starts from a somewhat different perspective to the US, because we've moved to separate train operations from the management of the infrastructure with the objective of encouraging competition on the network, particularly for freight, and breaking down some of the sort of national silos that we've previously had. That means it's perhaps even more important to have a very clear, standardized system. In the US, freight dominates. In the EU, passenger traffic dominates. So, of course, we have a lot of problem with our freight trains being heavily delayed because they're putting the sidings awaiting passenger traffic to pass. The opposite of Amtrak's experience, I think. And also because traffic densities in Europe are much higher in general, because population densities are very high, it also means that the focus of ERTMS has been on increasing capacity and also on delivering interoperability. It's not been driven by safety, because we had safe systems before. We believe ERTMS will be even safer, but it's about integrating those systems, creating a better environment for the future. And finally, of course, a lot of the metros in Europe, as with the subways in the US, do use CBTC. CBTC, we think in the medium term, should actually converge with the ERTMS in any case. But at the moment, they're two slightly different systems. Achieving deployment, well, I say we're putting a lot of money into ERTMS, so we're supporting member states. We're particularly supporting some of the railroads in actually the costs of rolling out the new equipment, because at the early stage, of course, there's a chicken and egg problem. If the infrastructure is not equipped, why put the equipment on your train or your locomotive, and vice versa. If the trains aren't all equipped, why deploy it on the network? So we're putting a lot of support financially into making it happen. We've also worked with all the railways across Europe to come up with what we believe are credible deployment timetables, again, so that actually everybody in the industry knows when it's worth investing and how to time that investment to deliver the maximum results. And we've also stabilized the specification for ERTMS, because we did have problems in the early stage of ERTMS development with too many options being allowed to operators, and therefore too many divergent implementations which were not delivering the interoperability that we wanted. So now we have we believe, pretty strong single software approach, and that will deliver the interoperability the system needs. Now, our focus, certainly driven by the freight, has been ensuring that the key corridors across Europe are equipped with ERTMS. This graph just shows that in spite of the quite high costs of delivering ERTMS, it will, on all the key freight corridors across Europe, deliver a positive business case and therefore justify everybody investing in it. But and this is a problem for delivering innovation across all sectors in rail. Getting the true benefits, getting the maximum economic impact of that is very dependent on ensuring that actually we do coordinate deployment. So that's why we've got these very strong deployment coordination instruments. As you see, if we make it purely fragmented deployment, then in the end, the business case isn't strong. Whereas if we actually get really full deployment in a coordinated manner, then we see a very positive cumulative impact. Well, why RTMS? Increased capacity, higher reliability, very importantly also reduced maintenance costs. Certainly as we move to the so-called level 2 RTMS, with this we can eliminate most of the wayside signalling, many of the wayside structures, and deliver very, very substantial 2/3 decreases in the costs of running a lot of the signalling system for many of our infrastructure managers. And that's something we want to build on more. And then finally, where do we go with the future? Well, you'll hear more of this from Carlo in a minute. But of course, the RTMS, although we've stabilized the specification to ensure delivery of an interoperable system across Europe, we can't afford simply to stand still. So we're now doing a lot of work, in particular to move to moving block, which will allow us to further reduce some of the trackside components, but also, of course, very importantly, will allow us to increase the capacity of the system, allow higher speeds in some situations. We're moving to look to use satellite positioning, again, avoiding the need for much of the current radio-based or physical balises on the track for positioning. And linking back to what I said about ATO, automatic train operation earlier, we are looking very much to develop very effective ATO, which can be overlaid on top of ERTMS, and therefore, again, get the benefits both of ERTMS and automation as a single hit in the investment program. And that will also allow us to develop concepts such as virtual coupling and some of these ideas of shorter pod-based trains that we see as potential for the future. So I hope there's some food for thought there. We'll be very interested in your questions later. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Keir, for that fantastic presentation. Next, we will hear from Carlo Borghini, the Executive Director of Shift to Rail Joint Undertaking, also in Brussels, and you heard a bit about that. Shift to Rail is a public-private partnership established by the European Union in the rail sector to coordinate research and to drive innovation for the ultimate goal of developing a single European railway area and promoting a modal shift from roads toward passenger rail. What a cool idea. Please join me in welcoming Carlo Borghini to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Well, I come from Italy, and it's quite late in the evening. It's the dinner time, but it's a bit different. I think it's the last presentation in the event, and I was thinking maybe what I need to do is to ensure that I convince you to invite me back because you will be curious to see what we have brought in Europe in our railway system. And I will try to present it now in a few slides. The slides are also there for your interest later on. The title was proposed by APTA that I really thank for the invitation. And it's quite interesting because say, okay, how we can re-energize the railway system. The railway system is essential because the challenges that we are facing, I think in Europe as around the world, are touching all the mobility of people and freight. And you can look at this. I think everyone is facing the quality of service. In one of the European capitals, they were able, with a strategic approach, to bring 39% of the population on using public transport every single day. And they would like to reach the magic figure of 40%. And they are trying for the last 5 years, and they are not succeeding. And they are trying to understand which are the reasons behind it. And these are typical reasons: the quality of service, the cost, how to integrate the different type of mobility transport, the infrastructure. Are we able to create an infrastructure that is appealing for the passenger? The competitiveness, because clearly we have autonomous vehicle coming in. We have a different type of concept of mobility, the bikes, like on my tie. But also, one of the challenges will be how we replace the workforce that is retiring and or moving to other sector or looking for other jobs. And will be the same people with the same job, the same skills. And finally, how we bring in innovation. And I think this is where we can make a major difference, is using innovation to provide a complete different type of service to the passenger and the freight business. because it's the only way to attract them on board. So when we started with the 3 lower targets that also Kier mentioned before. Cost efficiency. So we would like to achieve a reduction of the life cycle cost of 50%. It's quite important. And I think the new technologies are moving in a way that this will be possible, and maybe with higher reduction. Double the capacity, because I don't think there is, in any big part of the world, possibly at least in Europe and many other parts of the world, resources to further develop the network and the cost of the investment. But we can double the capacity. If you are in Europe and you are on, as I said, I come from Italy. My parents live south of Milano, 50 kilometers. There is the highway is 3 lanes each side, packed of cars and trucks every single day. You have a train on high-speed network every 15 minutes. Clearly, if you want to have more trains, we need to have more capacity, and this will help to reduce the impact on the roads. And the efficiency, because nobody takes a train. If the train, you don't know when it arrives, when it departs, why you are delayed, and so on and so on, because time is becoming more and more a cost for the organization. But now, what it came up is that all these new concepts came up at a speed that is quite impressive. We are looking at mobility as a service. So we are not looking anymore to entities having assets, would be transport company or any other services. We are looking at providing a service. As a passenger, I'm not interested to know how and which aircraft they will use, or train they will use, or car they will use to transport me. I want to be sure to move from one place to the other in the most appropriate time. And the change, someone said, when you would like to take a train, you are at the station, the departure station, you are in the wrong place because you want to move away. And when you arrive, you are still in the wrong place because you don't want to stay in the station. So you need to connect all the modes of transport. So the concept of mobility as a service is to ensure that the rail system fully integrates with all other mobility systems that you have in place. But also, all the rest came up. Industry 4.0 is a major transformation going on everywhere in the world. Zero-emission railway system. It's true that we have key targets from the environmental point of view, but still the energy we use and the system that we create are creating an impact on the environment. So we want to focus on a full zero-emission system. And obviously new technologies, which will be the impact on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, super capacity that is available and will come in the future years. So this is the picture that we draw together with the operators and network manager in Europe and also global level about how it will look like the future mobility system. And as you can see, it's not only about rail, it's about people and freight, and is fully integrated in the urban context, but also going beyond. And the idea is really to create, through different innovation capabilities, and capabilities the meaning of making the operator capable to provide the service. These capabilities have the objective to move from the current railway system that we know to new transformed railway system capable to provide a complete different type of service. And it's touching all the different type of subsystems that you have in railway and beyond the railway system. If you go on our website, you will see also all the detailed pictures related to it. I was not able to put in the presentation because it was too big, but you can have the picture of the different type of capabilities that we are delivering. And all this is framed in a short book. It's called Multi-Annual Action Plan Executive View. It's available on our website that explains the vision of Shift to Rail on the future railway system in Europe. And we hope that will also be the basis for others to look at how it can be integrated. And how we intend to do this? Well, the legislator decided to create a joint venture, and I will speak about it later on. But we created some technological programs divided in 5 different innovation programs, effectively, and 1 horizontal program. So we have 1 program dedicated to passenger trains, one program dedicated to the ERTMS, but especially on the advanced traffic management, is the heart of the system. It's around this that all is working. We have a program dedicated to infrastructure, because large parts of the cost come from the maintenance of infrastructure, comes from the energy consumption, so, but also on managing tunnels and bridges and switches, and how to address all the possibility there. We have a full innovation program dedicated to the passenger experience, how the person interface with the mobility and the transports. And finally, we have an innovation program dedicated to the freight. But as I said, we have also some horizontal activities in order to try to address all the different subsystems in a coordinated and consistent manner. And if you, I give you some example. If you look, for example, on the trains, and the passenger train in particular, we are looking at the comfort of the passenger. So we are looking at cargo de shell, at door, interiors, in order to provide a different type of experience. If you are traveling on a high-speed trains for 3 hours, you are requiring a service. If you are traveling on a commuter train, you ask completely different services. And the layout should be completely different. So the material is essential, if you especially, not only for safety, not only for comfort, but also for reducing the cost and the weight. The interior design we discussed, the doors. If you look at the energy aspect of the time the door open and close, or the frequency that the door open and close, this may have impact on performance of the full network. But also we are looking at the concrete assets, new traction system, new train control management system coordinated together with the heart that is the traffic management. So we are looking at the full subsystem to try to really create a new generation of train being able to capture the needs of the passengers. You have seen already this slide, is really the heart of the system, is how we ensure to move from the current system into which there is a heavy human factor and presence inside the management of the rail system to a fully automated system. And where we would like to go, especially in the period after 2020, would be to look at a system that is completely connected, completely efficient, completely capable to communicate at different level and make use of any type of digital communication to reduce the enormous cost of the infrastructure and the trackside infrastructure in particular. IP3, as mentioned before, there are three major chapters, is energy, is asset management, and a new generation of switches and crossing, including design to ensure that accident at crossing can be avoided, making use of technology, and having intelligent train connected with autonomous vehicle or intelligent car, and avoid that accident happen at the crossings. IP4 is looking for solution for the passenger experience. The idea is to create an interoperable framework capable to connect with different type of provider without creating interfaces, and providing information for the passenger in a manner that they are able to move without obstacles and barriers. I think it's quite incredible, because if you travel by plane, you can travel from Europe to the United States with one ticket, most probably in your mobile phone. If you arrive in a town, you need to start to take out coins or find cash to buy a ticket. And this is, for me, is incomprehensible. So we should find a way to make the life of all of us different. And this is what we are trying to do. And finally, we have a series of activities dedicated to the freight. Freight in Europe is only 18% of the goods in Europe are transported by train. That is completely different from the United States. And so we are trying to change the situation and take benefit of the experience also that you have here in the United States. In the cross-cutting activities, the few elements are really important, at least for Europe: noise and vibration, because it's affecting more than 10 million people in Europe, and also the question of the human capital, because There is a full generation of train drivers, engineers that will go to retirement in the future years, leaving a major gap in the systems. So how we do this? So we have the challenges, we have the capabilities, so we know what are the capabilities and the picture that we want for the future. We design a program that is defined in the multi-annual action plan, and we have been given 1 billion euros of research and innovation activities because the Shift to Rail is a joint venture. It's a joint venture of the sector, including manufacturing industry, operators, research center, universities, working together with the European Union, so like in the US, the federal government, to deliver all this changing in system transformation. And the system is quite simple, is for each €1 of research innovation done in Shift to Rail by our member, we finance up to 50%, so we put 50 cents. So out of 0.9 billion, so it will be around $1.1 billion, we have €500 million, so around $600 million, to finance the research and innovation activities. And we do this through the public procurement. So we have selected to public procurement the member working with us, and also non-member working with us. And as you can see, members are 343 entities today, coming from all parts of Europe, contributing in one way or the other to the work. We are estimating that we have more or less 2,000 people working at the moment in research and innovation in railway spread in all the parts of Europe. And where we are at the moment? Well, we started 2 years ago, and in 2 years we have committed the research and innovation activity for around €500 million. We have 50 projects going on, tackling all the innovation programs you saw before. We are going through control gate and review processes, so we are assessing all the results coming, and we will show some of the key results at InnoTrans in September. So for example, I saw here in Denver that you have trams that are coupled physically together, 3 or 4 of them. We will make a demonstration on possibility of using virtual coupling, exactly with 2 trams. It's a work that will be done together by Siemens, Bombardier, CAF, Huawei, and some operators. We will demonstrate some concept related to moving blocks. We will demonstrate about the possibility of testing freight trains, braking system digitally, without having people around it, and so on and so on. So we have around 20 demonstration activity showing the initial results coming from the work we are doing. We have just awarding around €200 million now. I think the decision will come at the end of the month. And we are looking also what is coming after 2020. Research innovation is really nice, and is really the change, and one of the game changers in the capacity of Europe, and I think all parts of the world, to change and to bring a different future. But if it doesn't go to the market, nothing happens. So we built up a system that is quite complex, as you can see here, but I think is similar in other area, where we try to take the results coming from the gray area, so our results, and bring up to standards that would be all regulatory standards that the Commission will adopt by regulation, or industry standards, or international standards. And the idea is to be sure that all the innovation can go in the system, because the railway is a fully integrated system. So you cannot introduce pieces if you don't look at it in a coherent approach. And although we have started only 2 years ago, the results are starting to come. We have quite important progress going on. We are looking for more automation. We are looking more digitalization aspect. We are looking to embed new technologies. We are also looking at how to get rid of the past to a certain extent. We are looking also at the future and try to integrate more the full value chain to bring from blue sky research to the deployment coordination. So Kier mentioned before Hyperloop. Well, Hyperloop can be considered a blue sky research. The question is that whatever it will be the final result, I don't know, I'm not an engineer, so I come from merger acquisition. But if whatever is the result, the spin-off coming from the research investment done in trying to bring Hyperloop to the market will have an impact on any type of humidity system. Would be for material, for energy consumption, for the vacuum, and so on and so on. So this is where we are trying to capture not only what is we know, so that we expect will be possible to bring to the market, taking also from other sectors like aviation or like automotive, but especially take also the opportunity from what is not in the market, but can be promising and becoming challenging for the other sector. And finally, this is our membership, as I said before, is really, as much as we are an institution, so you can compare us to a federal agency to a certain extent. At the same time, we have a special composition because we are based on the selection of members. At the center, you can see the European Union flag, because the European Union is the engine that brought the shift to rail to be in place. But after, you can see we have selected 27 members, representing more than 50 entities that are, I think, known around the world, that are working together, and this is the major advantage of the joint undertaking. They are working together to ensure that we are capable to bring innovative solutions to the market. And I think this is really where we are making the change, is really to bring the know-how spread in different type of sector, spread in different type of companies, and bring this together through public procurement in order to change the services to the client and to the freight. Thank you very much.
Okay. Carlo, thank you so much. Kier, I'm going to ask you to join us up here for a bit of question and answer. So we've built this, you've heard two great presentations about where European rail is headed. Fantastic vision, some great things they're doing. But we want to open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you want to make your way to the mic. Otherwise, you're going to be relying on me to ask these questions. I don't know that you want that. And so feel free, if you have questions. We want this to be really quite an interactive dialogue with the audience and with these two great speakers. Any takers? No takers? All right, I'll get us started. So let's talk about ridership for a second. So, a lot of us here in the room are at agencies that are seeing ridership declines and ridership trends declining. Could you talk about what that trend is looking like in Europe? And specifically, I think you two kind of touched on it a little bit, but also, demographics to some extent, right? So we're seeing millennials come on board, different travel patterns, different ways of getting around, different type of mobility, right? And so could you talk a bit about, just ridership in general, trends, as well as, how you're reacting to demographics and sort of a new social paradigm?
Yeah, I think the trends are different in different parts of Europe. As I said, if you look at parts of Eastern Europe, you've got a lot of old systems which haven't been heavily invested in recently. You've got people who've become much wealthier in the last 20 years and are going through what perhaps in North America or in Western Europe we did 40 or 50 years ago with the car being seen as the status symbol. Mm-hmm. And so there you've seen some places where rail traffic is declining. But if you look at Central and Western Europe, we've seen very strong growth over the past 20 years, but in particular in the past 10 years. Particularly with the traffic into cities, because we've had, of course, a trend towards reurbanization, so the cities becoming more dense again, therefore increased problems with congestion, etc. So rail has become very attractive. If you look at the UK, for example, there's been something like 120% increase in rail traffic over about the past 15 years, which is huge. Some sign in some places that some of this growth is stabilizing a bit now as you see things like car sharing come on board. Not to a huge extent, and probably less of a challenge in Europe than it's been in the US, because simply the issues of congestion are so much bigger. Also, of course, although the gas price is lower than it has been because we have a big tax on fuel in Europe, the overall proportionate change has been much less. And very much as here, millennials, I mean, you see a lot of trend of millennials simply not going out and getting driver's licenses, not buying cars. So again, very heavily driving, increased use of transit.
That's good. Carlo, any?
Yeah, maybe I think there are two areas where I think there is really a major opportunity. The first is the high speed, because this really creates the possibility for a completely different business model. In Italy, for example, the high speed between Milano and Roma changed completely the business model of 3 towns in between, that one is Firenze and the other Bologna. People having offices before in the 3 towns, they are moving, they close the offices and are moving by train. They can have a meeting in the morning in Milano and dinner in Roma without any major. So it's really a complete change in the business model and connecting people of different regions. And is spreading around Europe. So we have and the second one, I think, is a major opportunity, is that we have more and more larger towns around the world, not only in Europe, and urban and suburban railway transport will be the only one, in my opinion, capable, together with a network of buses and maybe share car, to serve the population. The rail cannot go everywhere. It's too expensive to imagine going everywhere. Should be fully integrated in this network. And I think this is really also the change we like to bring. Is railway is not a competitor, but we need to work together with the mobility. And I think the fact that administration are overlooking the different component, and I was impressed about what you did, your experience, is really the idea to create a different model of mobility for the people. And I think someone told me that in Canada they were able to bring a lot of millennials on board back on metro system and train system, thanks to the fact that they improved the quality of Wi-Fi. And it's something simple, but really is looking at the needs of the people that you want to have on board.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. I see we do have a question back there. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I was willing to stand up and expose myself. My name is John Adams. I'm with HDR. Thank you very much for your presentations. Keir, you had touched on something, and Carlo, you just touched on another aspect of communications, which are so important to not only making sure that the operations and maintenance of a railroad, of a transportation system work, but making a passenger experience that draws them and makes them willing to sit inside something other than their own vehicle. Europeans were a long way ahead of the United States and most other places in the world by developing GSMR back in the 1980s and creating a system where all the different national railways and their national communications entities, their telecom and posts or whatever they were willing to devote spectrum to create systems that work for this kind of stuff. The world has changed a lot in 30, 40 years. A lot of that has been denationalized. The spectrum needs do not decrease. They only grow in time. So GSMR is heavily strained. And I know that there's an LTER effort, but still, spectrum is no longer something that it gets auctioned off here. And I don't know, how does ERTMS intend to take advantage of the challenges with spectrum and to make sure that you can meet your capacities? And on the other hand, what Carlo just talked about, the millennials, even me, I'm kind of an old millennial. I was the last millennials, I guess. But I want to be connected wherever I go. I want to be able to work. I want to be able to play. I want to watch cat videos. How am I going to do all this in the world where spectrum is more and more constrained?
Maybe I can start. This is really one of the discussions we have at the heart now in the question of the next generation of ERTMS, how we evolve the communication. So if you take we move from GSMR to 5G, there is a full possibility of services. GSMR has been built to ensure safety-related services. And if you continue to do only safety-related services, we could continue with GSMR for the next years. In reality, what we are trying to do is that we are introducing automation in different type of levels. And in order to introduce automation, we need to benefit from services that today are not available. So for example, if we have an autonomous high-speed train going from Paris to Brussels, you cannot imagine to have 120 people, 120 minutes or something like this, or a couple of hours of people, 800 people alone without video surveillance or telecommunication and so on and so on. So it's clear that there we need the 5G in order to provide these services online continuously. And these are the type of discussion that we are having now. Which is the minimum and essential bandwidth we need to provide the necessary safety and security of the operations, and how much bandwidth we need for providing all the additional services. And this clearly is a discussion that takes place with the regulator, with the industry, with the telecommunication company. We know also with the new automation coming from the automotive, there will be extremely need for bandwidth, so this will be another aspect. And I think will be a combination of different factors. We may consider to have still a reserve bandwidth for the safety and security aspect, but leave all the rest to more commercial use. It's a question of really to look exactly which are the specific needs and how we can make use of it. It will be a complex transition because we require an investment and moving from the current analog transmission to digital transmission. So this will be the first jump, and after it will require other assessment.
I mean, just to complete that, in terms of bandwidth in Europe, I mean, we've had a discussion, in fact, over the last couple of years about what the available bandwidth should be. The European railways still have a 2x4 megahertz band reserved for GSM-R. And what we've actually been arguing about is a 3 megahertz reserve bandwidth. And of course, we want to transition away from GSM-R as quickly as possible because it is a very old technology, it's obsolete, and it's very inefficient use of bandwidth. And what we seem to have managed to agree with the radio spectrum regulators is that we should be able to keep the 4 megahertz plus 1.5 megahertz on top to allow us to manage that transition. And we think that 5.5 megahertz, actually, once you move it up into a 4G or 5G solution, should give plenty of bandwidth for all the safety critical components of train communication. Then there's the issue of how you build on top of it the services for passengers, etc. I mean, that clearly we need to look at working much more closely with the commercial operators, perhaps also using the commercial operators in some cases to provide additional bandwidth even for the safety critical operations. I mean, it's been done for some other services in parts of Europe that actually commercial operators are providing safety critical services, so we should look at that as well. I think where we have perhaps more of an issue is actually for the urban operators for CBTC, where CBTC is using the same bandwidth as the autonomous vehicle, the autonomous road vehicle people want to use. And there I think there's quite a robust discussion ongoing at the moment to try and ensure that all the needs are met. So that's very much a place to watch and perhaps a place to lobby quite hard.
That's great. Thanks, guys. I'm going to go over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Josef Kimieger, and I'm from Gannett Fleming. It is very heartwarming to see people in the political world talking about CBTC, moving block, and advanced train control systems. That's really nice and interesting. Keir, you touched on some differences between Europe and America, which they're perfect. Europe is mainly focused on the interoperabilities, while here we see that it is mainly on the safety side. You're working on the passenger rail, we're working on the freight rail. So there are, however, some commonalities, and Carlo being an expert in the mergers, so I believe that there are some possibilities, and it is a time right now in order just to focus on the common areas and bring the two sides of the pond together in order to have some structured dialogue. These events are very good, but it's not as structured that we can work on coming to a common solution in order just to take advantage of the researchers, innovations that have been progressed by Europe or Americas in order to advance our industry further. So I want to just find out what are your views about having this structured way in order to move forward.
Well, I think we're very interested in working with you. I mean, one reason we're here, of course, is to understand what's going on in the US, but also to see how we can pool our resources, because, I mean, rail is always going to be a relatively small area, and the idea that we're developing different solutions to common problems, even when actually, as you see from Carlo's slide of the Shift to Rail members, I mean, most of our suppliers are also active, indeed some of the major suppliers in North America. So where we can find common solutions, we must do that, because I mean, that will drive down the costs of kit for everybody, increase the attractiveness of rail for everybody. And of course, if you look at aviation, I mean, if you're buying a passenger aircraft, you have a choice of Boeing, you have a choice of Airbus, and they're the same pretty much wherever you go in the world. So the idea that we're doing completely different solutions in different markets is clearly something we have to move away from. But because rail is so dependent on the interaction between infrastructure and the vehicles, it is hard, but we've got to start somewhere. And of course, just to go back to ERTMS in Europe, I mean, actually one of the reasons we're pushing it so hard is precisely to try and get the freight to work more attractively, because it's particularly freight that is attractive for long distances and therefore involves crossing a lot of national frontiers. And if every time you cross a frontier you have to change all your systems, it's simply something you don't do. You put it on a truck that drives across Europe with absolutely no restrictions. So we are looking at freight as well.
Great.
I think it's fundamental that we work together and collaborate. I think there are areas where we share the views, and I think we share. The driving point at the end for me should be the business model. So we are looking at finding a solution to address capacity on the current network for passenger and freight trains, because we don't have separate networks. And this will be based on using new technologies. And I think the work you are doing on PTC, for example, on satellite and GPS, and the work we are doing in ERTMS using maybe satellite positioning, combining GPS and GNSS, this is an area where we can work together for sure, because the objective is that at the end to reduce the cost of the trackside infrastructure in favor of new technologies. So I think the collaboration is to find which answer you are looking for your business model, and which are what we are looking for the business model we are trying to bring in Europe. And when these are going together, we should work together to maximize the benefit of this work. And this was the discussion also we had in the couple of last days with FRA and APTA, the TTCI, exactly on which are the opportunity, AAR, which are the opportunity to work together on some subjects, maybe on concrete projects that will help to accelerate the deployment of new technologies.
Okay, thanks. Let's go over here.
Hi, Malcolm Kenton with Trains Magazine. So from, in terms of passenger rail, from your European perspective, and you look at what we're doing in the US, what is the one thing that you just wish that the US would have done, already have done by now, or decades ago perhaps? Like you just look at the US and say, why haven't you done this? What would
Well, I mean, I think the obvious difference between EU and US is that in the EU we give the passenger trains priority, which does help a lot with the reliability of passenger trains. But as I say, that creates problems for freight. So if you want a good freight network, then doing what you're doing is fine, but you need to find a way of helping the passenger trains run alongside that more readily. Mm-hmm. I think also when you're looking at some of your new investments, if you can look at common standards across different parts of the US. I mean, I was sitting in on the high-speed session this morning, and it sounded as though different specs were being developed by some of the different projects. I mean, there may be short-term reasons for doing that, but I think in the long term that will cause you a lot of problems. So try and keep to common standards. The more we can work with different parts of the world and have common products globally, I mean, again, that will help a lot in driving down costs.
Carlo, any thoughts?
I'm not so good to look at the past. I'm always looking at the future, maybe because But I think that in Europe, as in US, I think the most important thing is looking at the needs of the passengers and the business and the freight business. I think this is really where we can make a major difference now, using new technologies and new ideas, is are we able to answer the evolving needs that we have? would be millennial of the previous millennial or the future one or maybe the next generation, and how we can really bring these services to the passenger and to the freight business.
That's great. Let's take one more question.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and the first thing I want to say is welcome to Denver. My name is Doug Tisdale, and I am the chairman of the board of directors of the Regional Transportation District here in Denver. So we are honored to have you here, and we thank you for your kind words about Denver and the RTD. We appreciate that very much. I did want to ask what I suppose is a sort of political question, and that is, you talked about in the past it was difficult to get the countries in Europe to agree upon standardization, essentially. There are many things that are non-standard, and now with the European Union there's a greater effort and ability to bring standardization about. But there's another element to it that you also mentioned, and I wanted to have you expand upon that a little, if you might please, and that relates to the private sector, the business side. Do you find that the businesses are committed to this standardization and expansion across Europe, or are there still some local or parochial interests that aren't quite connected yet? One thinks that the private sector is usually the first to look for that interconnectivity, but I'm wondering what your experience has been.
I think, and I mean, I said in my presentation, of course, we started from a situation where you had national railways and you had people who were very clearly the preferred supplier of those national railways. I think what you've seen over the past 20, 25 years is most of those national suppliers merging into much bigger pan-European or indeed global enterprises. So, I mean, the people you're very familiar with, I mean, Bombardier started life as a Canadian company, but actually now bought up a very wide range of European suppliers. For example, Siemens and Alstom, as you know, are merging over the next couple of years. So we will move away from that situation where there were preferred national champions very much to European or global suppliers. I think there is still a historic lock-in where they've provided systems to some railways, which of course they make a lot of money out of selling spare parts, maintenance for. So there may be some push sometimes for them to carry on doing that. But I think they also very clearly see that this is a business where they've got to have the global scale to actually be able to innovate, to make profits, to make rail something which has a future. So I think they are working with us, and they are pretty committed to a future where we do have these common standards, because that will drive down their costs, drive up the portability of their products as well. But it will take time. I mean, and of course what they think, if you talk to them at the strategic level, maybe not the same as the people who are making things on the ground and fear their factory shutting, their jobs being lost if they move to this really global approach.
Carlo, maybe 1 minute.
Well, the commitment that we have in Shift to Rail is a clear sign of the fact that the investment at CEO level in a joint undertaking and working together is a sign of the willingness to go ahead. I don't think there is any more any manufacturer thinking they can survive building boxes that are different. But we need also to realize that the manufacturer answer procurement requests. If the operator continue to ask to have a box that is square and the other is asking for a round, they will make it because they make money. So I think it's a collective responsibility of the manufacturing industry that has to understand the evolution of the market. I think digitalization is one of the key answers going in this direction. But the other is also the operators that need to understand that if we want to reduce the life cycle cost and provide a different type of services and really create competitiveness, we need to have standards also in the procurement approach. So it's really a collective work that has to be done to address. Clearly, you cannot have the rail system the same in the south of the states where you have sand and in the north of the states where you have snow. But still, we should go in this direction.
That's great. Well, I'm going to stop us right there. I want to thank you all. Let's give these guys a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Great work, guys. And thank you to those of you asking questions. It's the final closing session, so thanks for staying with us. You all get extra credit. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kevin, Carlo, and Keir, for the great discussion and a valuable perspective from Europe. You've given us a great deal to think about and to plan for. Excuse me. Please join me once again in showing our appreciation for Kevin Quinn, Carlo Borghini, and Keir Fitch. And now I'd like to introduce the host agency for next year's Rail Conference and International Rail Rodeo. We just heard from 2 European voices, so in continuing that trend of learning from non-U.S. transportation organizations, I'm pleased to welcome Albert Oliver, Head of Streetcar Transportation for the Toronto Transit Commission.
Hello, everybody. I'm Albert Oliver, Head of Streetcar Transportation at TTC, Toronto Transit Commission. I have the pleasure of inviting all of you to the 2019 APTA Rail Conference and International Rodeo taking place in our beautiful and diverse city of Toronto. But first, I want to note the amazing job that Dave, RTD, and the City of Denver has done with this conference, how high the bar has been set. We got a task ahead of us for next year, we know that. But we at TTC can't wait to share with you more about our city. It has been undergoing an incredible transformation over the past couple of years. And for everyone's information, TTC is the 3rd largest North American transit system. We have over 14,000 employees. We serve 1.8 million customers a day. We're nearing almost 100 years of service. We started in 2019. And we not only operate streetcars and rail, but we have a bus service and a paratransit service as well. With that, I have a video that I'd like to share with you. It shows a bit more about our city, and if we could start that.
Hello, APTA members. I'm John Tory, the Mayor of Toronto, and I am so excited. We're all excited about the fact that APTA with the International Rail Rodeo is coming to Toronto in 2019, and you will find out all that this great city has to offer. And the fact that you can get around and enjoy the music and the nightlife and the food on our wonderful TTC. It can take you to the Toronto Island, it can take you to the CN Tower, to High Park, and all points in between.
Hello, APTA. My name is Josh Cole, Chair of the Toronto Transit Commission, and as a proud APTA member, we're thrilled to be hosting you next year at your conference. Come to Toronto, see our transit system, see how we've modernized the entire TTC, and visit our wonderful city. We look forward to seeing you here next year.
Hi, I'm Rick Leary. I'm the CEO for the Toronto Transit Commission, and I can tell you that we're proud and excited to be hosting the 2019 APTA Rail Conference and International Rail Rodeo in Toronto, here in Canada, where I call home. And we can't wait to show you our modern, reliable, integrated system, from our new fleet, our Toronto Rockets, and our accessible new streetcars, as well as our ongoing expansion projects. And of course, the friendly men and women of the TTC who provide exceptional service to this city. We draw our high standards of customer care from our rich traditions of safety, service, and courtesy, and are committed to our residents and our visitors a transit system that makes Toronto proud. We'll see you in June of next year.
We are looking forward to sharing with you all that this great city of Toronto has to offer. So we'll see you in 2019.
So once again, we look forward to inviting the APTA family to Toronto. Look forward to see you in 2019. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Albert. Thank you, TTC, and thank you, Toronto. We look forward to being in your city north of the border in June next year. In bringing this conference to a close, and I think it's good for me that we're closing because after 6 days, my voice is about to check out, I think. I do have one final duty to perform, and that is to select the winner of the $500 gift card. I used to pull bingo, so anybody want to yell, shake it up? The winning number, last 4 digits, 7197. 428-7197. All right, we have a winner. The winner is Mr. Richard Curtis. Congratulations, Richard. And with that, I thank you for participating in the closing session today. The 2018 Rail Conference is adjourned. We meet again in Toronto, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you, and safe travels.